Hi students, welcome to EPG Pathshala project. Let me introduce myself. I am Dr. Bindu B, working as Assistant Professor in Montfortian Training College, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. Today, we are going to discuss about the economic perspectives of education. Let me start the module on education and poverty eradication in India. The objectives are to explain and define the concept of poverty, to explain and identify reasons for poverty, to explain and define the concept of poverty line, to analyze the impact of education on poverty eradication, to understand the various programs initiated by the government in poverty eradication, and also to elaborate the role of education in poverty eradication. Every day in media, we are coming across the word poverty. This may be about the condition of the poor people in and around us, may be about the measures adopted by the government for eradicating poverty, etc. Hence, in this context, we need to define poverty so as to know what it is. Poverty is a social, economic phenomenon in which a section of society is unable to fulfill even its basic necessities of life. As we know, the minimum needs are food, clothing, housing, education and other basic minimum human needs. In other words, we can define poverty as a state of deprivation. People and even countries remain poor because they are poor. Let us see why this happens. A poor man cannot get education, marketable skill and that keep him in the state of poverty. A poor family begets more children because they cannot afford artificial methods of conception control and this keeps them poor. In other words, poverty is seclusion, neglect by society and loss of self-respect. It is not God ordained but man-made malady. Poor persons live in shanty houses, slum areas and thatched huts and sometimes in open. They may not be in a position to overcome their state of poverty due to many factors. This will result in vicious circle of poverty which makes the poor poorer. The reasons of poverty may be landlessness, unemployment, size of families, illiteracy, poor health and malnutrition, child labor, helplessness, etc. All these factors are considered as many facets of poverty. To make it more clear, poverty not only means low income and consumption, but also feeling of powerlessness, vulnerability and fears because poor people are not free and are exposed to greater risk living in the margin of subsistence. If analyzed, we can see that all the factors of poverty are closely interrelated. There is a nexus between unemployment and poverty. Let me explain this in detail. Poor people cannot imbibe tradable skills and therefore remain unemployed, or are employed in very low wages and therefore remain poor. This causes a vicious circle of poverty, that is, low employment skills leading to illiteracy, high morbidity, low income and again poverty. Thus the cause become the consequences and consequences become the cause. Let me quote the words of Adam Smith, which is highly remarkable in this context. No society can surely be flourishing and happy of which the far greater part of the members are poor and miserable. What does it imply? Poverty and inequality are closely related, and inequality appears to have been on the rise worldwide in recent decades at both national and international levels. More than 80% of the world's population lives in countries where income differentials are widening. The poorest 40% of the world's population account for only 5% of global income. Now, you may be in a position to give your own definition of poverty. Human poverty means the denial of choices and opportunities for a tolerable life in all economic and social aspects. Take the case of our country, India. Our country is faced with acute problems of poverty. Nearly one-fifth of the population is still fighting with poverty. The locus of poverty is in rural areas, of which spills over to urban slums. India is concerned with eradication of absolute poverty in the country. Dear students, now you may think that poverty means poor income condition, but there are other two important concepts. The concepts of income poverty and education poverty. Let us see what they are. The concept of income poverty denotes the number of people below the poverty line and is measured in different ways, predominantly in terms of insufficiency of income to procure a minimum level of calories. On the other hand, education poverty is the state of deprivation, exclusion, etc. While those who are deprived of literacy and primary education constitute educationally the poorest, those who have just literacy or just primary education cannot be considered as non-poor. The Government of India has taken a major step in this direction in the form of 73rd and 74th Amendment to the Constitution to give more powers to Panchayati Raj institution. This is because reduction of poverty in India is vital for the attainment of international goals. The philosophy underlying the poverty alleviation program is to tackle the rural poverty by endowing the poor with productive assets and training for raising their skills so that they are assured of a regular stream of employment and income in raising themselves above the poverty line. At the macro level, there is a need to coordinate poverty alleviation programs of the central government and the state government. The transfer of central funds to the state for different programs should be efficient. Currently, such funds and goods like food grains are not fully utilized by the state. For proper allocation, we need to identify who are the poorest section. Is it possible to measure poverty? Yes, this is being done through the concept of poverty line. A common method used to measure poverty is based on the income or consumption levels. A person is considered poor if his income or consumption levels fall below a given minimum level necessary to fulfill his basic needs. There is a headcount method of measuring who is poor and who is not. This is based on calorie norm. Any person who cannot get 2400 calories per day in rural areas and 2100 calories per day in urban areas is considered to be poor. Then we can find out a standard basket of commodities that will ensure at the minimum price. The quantities multiplied by the price give the amount of money that a person will need for a day. A family of 5 is taken as a standard family, and that amount will be multiplied with 5 and then with 365 days. This is known as cut-off point for measuring poverty. In India, 24% of the people live below poverty line, which means that even today 24% of the population is having difficulty in finding a minimum level of food requirement, clothing, footwear, fuel, light, educational and medical requirement, etc. In India, the present formula for food requirement while estimating poverty line is based on the desired calorie requirement. As we said earlier, the accepted average calorie requirement in India is 2400 calories per person per day in rural areas and 2100 calories per person per day in urban areas. Why there happens to be a disparity in calorie values in rural and urban areas? Since people living in rural areas engage themselves in more physical work, calorie requirements of rural areas are to be considered higher than urban areas. Poverty line is a cut-off point on the income distribution, which divides the population as poor and non-poor. People below poverty line are poor and above that line are average or rich. Now, we will pass on to the steps for eradication of poverty in India. The big issue before us is to how to eradicate poverty, and this is possible through promoting opportunity, facilitating empowerment, enhancing security. Let us see one by one. Promoting opportunity is expanding economic opportunities for poor people through the process of economic growth. Facilitating empowerment means strengthening the participation of poor people in decision making, eliminating various forms of discrimination that can be ethnic, religious, sexual, and making state institutions more responsible and accountable to poor people. Finally, enhancing security means reducing poor people's vulnerability to the various forms of insecurity that affects people's lives, such as natural disasters, economic shocks, crop failure, ill health, violence, wars, etc., and helping people to cope up with these situations. All this point to the fact that there is linkage between education and poverty. Education and poverty are inversely related. What does it mean? The higher the level of education of the population, lesser will be the number of poor persons, because education imparts knowledge and skills, which is supportive in higher wages. The direct effect of education on poverty reduction is through increasing the earnings, that is income or wages. The indirect effect of education on poverty is important with respect to human poverty, because as education improves the income, the fulfillment of basic necessities becomes easier and raises the living standards, which surely means the fall in human poverty. The education indirectly helps in the fulfillment of basic needs like water and sanitation, utilization of health facilities, shelter, and it also affects the women's behavior in fertility decision and family planning. It is understood that such basic needs present increase the productivity and wages, consequently putting people above the poverty line. The linkage between education and poverty broadly can be classified into two ways. First, investment in education increases the skills and productivity of poor households. It enhances the income level as well as the overall standard of living. Human development is possible. Secondly, poverty is also a big impediment in educational attainment. That is, poverty affects the educational achievement in three dimensions. The very first one is from resource side, that is, learning and financial resources. Second one is the generation of such social pressures which mutilates the mindset of the poor student. And lastly, when poverty grabs any institution, it deteriorates the teaching standards. At macro level, we can generally examine that poor countries have low levels of education, and at micro level, children of poor families do not attend schools. The reason behind the absence of poor children in schools are economic and non-economic constraints. For example, male children are considered as source of income in the form of child labor, whereas girls are generally supportive to mothers in household work and in caring younger brothers and sisters. Moreover, some useless social norms and so-called religious doctrine keenly restrain girls' education. Hence, the lack of education is a cause of low earning potential of any person, and poverty persists in ever next generation of that household. It is noteworthy that the education poverty, that is, lack of education, and income poverty have a mutually reinforcing relationship with each other, both at macro level and micro levels. Lack of education is a key factor of income poverty, and absence of sufficient income earnings can't overcome the education poverty. Moreover, education helps in fulfillment of basic needs for eradicating poverty. And basic needs themselves include the education availability. Hence, provision of education and fulfillment of basic needs both reinforce each other. The inverse relationship between education and poverty has been recognized, but there is a debate relating to the educational levels, whether primary education is enough for the ultimate outcome or all education levels, that is primary, secondary and highest education levels have to be focused simultaneously. Even the Millennium Development Goals, that is MDGs of the United Nations and the Poverty Reduction Strategy papers, usually referred as PRSP, recommended by the World Bank, focuses mainly upon the primary education of girls and girls' education. In developing countries, the social returns of primary education are much higher as compared to that of tertiary education, and most of the time the relatively rich people continue their tertiary education. Expanding tertiary education is 20 to 50 times costly as compared with the primary education expansion. Therefore, government in developing economies want to reduce poverty in the cheapest manner, and education is considered as a means for eradicating poverty. All this point to the fact that poverty can be eradicated through education. But how? Education can lead to economic growth through production of material wealth, which promotes national welfare and prosperity, development of talents and virtues resulting in integrated personalities who are asset to economic progress. Then again, it is possible for the development of human resources leading to improvement in skills, knowledge and attitude. Qualitative and quantitative improvement through educational innovations and research, quality labor, efficient administration, well-trained professionals, etc. Secondly, education can bring forth empowerment in many dimensions, such as economic empowerment through eradication of economic disparities. Second, social empowerment through gender equity and upgradation of social status. Political empowerment through guarantee of one's rights. And educational empowerment through equality of opportunities. Finally, education acts as a means for enhancing security through awareness programs on disaster management, health, hygiene, etc., and also entrepreneurial training. Now, you may be in a position to identify the impact of education in poverty eradication and economic development. Education provides a foundation for eradicating poverty and fostering economic development. It is the groundwork on which most of the economic and social well-being of the citizens is built. Education is the key to increasing economic efficiency and social consistency by increasing the value and efficiency of the labor force and consequently raises the poor from poverty. Education increases the overall productivity and intellectual flexibility of the labor force and ensures that a country is competitive in world market, now characterized by changing technologies and production methods. The primary determinants of a country's standard of living is how well it succeeds in developing and utilizing the skills and knowledge and furthering the health and educating the majority of its population. No country has achieved constant economic development without considerable investment in education and human capital. This is achieved through various forms of human capital accumulation, basic education, research, training, and aptitude building. What will happen if there is no equality in educational opportunities? Unequal education tends to have a negative impact on per capita income, thereby increases poverty in the country. Educating girls and women is probably the single most effective investment in developing countries like India can make whether or not women work outside the home. Why is it necessary to have special programs for women education? It creates a multitude of positive remunerations for families, including better family health and nutrition, improved birth spacing, lower infant and child mortality, and enhanced educational attainment of children. In order for a country to be adequately integrated in world market for manufactured goods and compete in this market and in globalizing service markets will depend on the excellence of human capital they bring to the competition. Ensuring that all citizens are educated and numerate, that many possess a wide range of problem-solving skills beyond the basic level, and that some have world-class professional skill will be an advantage. Now we may conclude that education helps in eradicating poverty. But in the case of India, majority of our population resides in rural areas and depend upon agriculture. In such a situation, is it possible to carry the seeds of education to our farmlands? Yes, education helps in the development of various sectors of the economy. Let us have a detailed look into this. That is, first one is better agriculture growth through education. In agriculture, evidence suggests positive effect of education on productivity among farmers using modern technologies, but less impact as might be expected among those using traditional methods. Farmers will be aware of modern methods of cultivation, modern practices, fertilizers, etc., which will have a direct effect on the higher productivity and thus raises the income of the farmers and thereby increases the standard of living. Second one is better productivity through education. Clearly, the educational programs within any given country represent one of the main determinants of the composition and growth of that country's output and exports and constitute an important ingredient in a system's capacity to borrow foreign technology effectively. For example, health and nutrition and primary secondary education all raise the productivity of workers, rural and urban. Secondary education, including occasional facilities, the acquisition of skills and managerial capacity. Tertiary education supports the development of basic science, the appropriate selection of technology, imports, and the domestic adaptation of development of technologies. Secondary and tertiary education also represent critical elements in the development of key institutions of government, the law and the financial system among others, all essential for economic growth. Empirical evidences at both micro and macro levels further illuminates these relationships. At a micro level, numerous studies indicate that increase in earnings are associated with additional years of education, with the rate of return varying with high level of education. Better industrial growth through education. Education is also an important contributor to technological capability and technical change in industry also. The higher the level of education of the workforce, the higher the overall productivity of capital, because the more educated are more likely to innovate and thus affect everyone's productivity. This implies that increased education of individuals raises not only their own productivity but also that of others with whom they interact, so that total productivity increases as the average level of education increases. The next is reducing inequality through education. There is also a positive feedback from improved education to greater income equality, which in turn is likely to favor higher rates of growth. As education becomes more broadly based, low income people are better able to seek out economic opportunities. education may affect per capita income growth via its impact on the denominator, that is population growth. The next is better health through education. Education of the poor helps improve their food intake not only by raising their incomes and spending on food, but also by including them to make better, healthier choices. Of course, the relation between education and better health and life expectancy involves causation in both directions. For greater health and lower mortality also induce larger investment in education and other human capital, since rates of return of these investments are greater when the expected amount of working time is greater. Let's have a glimpse into the governmental measures in India for poverty eradication. We'll begin with Prime Minister's Rozgar Yojana, PMRY. PMRY was started in 1993 with the objective of making available self-employment opportunities to the educated unemployed youth by assisting them in setting up viable activity. Next is Rural Employment Generation Program, REGP. REGP was launched in 1995 with the objective of creating self-employment opportunities in the rural areas and small towns. This is being implemented by the Khadi and Village Industries Commission, that is KVIC. Next is National Social Assistance Program, NSAP. This program was launched during 1995-96. It provides three types of services to poor people, that is National Family Benefit Scheme, National Old Age Pension Scheme, National Maternity Benefit Scheme. The whole of expenditure on this scheme is spent by central government since 2001. Next is Swarna Jayanti Shahri Rozgar Yojana, SJSRY. This program was launched on 1st December 1997. Its main objective is to provide self-employment to unemployed youth of urban area. Next is Swarna Jayanti Gram Sarozgar Yojana. Launched in April 1999, aims at bringing the assisted poor families above the poverty line by organizing them into self-help groups through a mix of bank credit and government subsidy. The next comes Indira Awas Yojana, IAY. This is a major scheme for construction of houses of unserviceable kacha houses to semi-pakka houses. Antyodaya Anna Yojana, that is AAY, launched in December 2000, provide food grains at a highly subsidized rate of 2 rupees per kg for wheat and 3 rupees per kg for rice to poor families under the targeted public distribution system. Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, that is launched in December 2000 as a 100% centrally sponsored scheme, aims at providing rural connectivity to unconnected habitations with population of 500 persons or more in the rural areas by the end of 10th plan period. The next comes Annapurna Yojana. This scheme was initiated on 1st April 2000. It is 100% centrally sponsored plan. It provides food grains to senior citizens. The National Food for Work Program, in line with the NCMP National Food for Work Program, was launched on November 14, 2004 in 150 most backward districts of the country with the objective of intensify the generation of supplementary wage employment. Then comes National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, NREGS. This scheme was introduced on 2nd February 2006. For this scheme, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act was passed on 7th September 2005. In this scheme, two schemes have been included, that is Sampurna Gramin Rozgar Yojana and National Food for Work Program. The NREGS scheme was started in 200 districts in the beginning. Then next comes the public distribution system. Poor people are provided food grains on cheaper rates through 4 lakh fair price shops so as to assure food security to them. Then comes Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program, PMEP. This program was introduced by the government on 15th August 2008. In it, two employment programs have been merged, that is, Prime Minister Rozgar Yojana and Rural Employment Generation Program. The main objective of this program is to generate new employment opportunities through micro enterprises. About 37 lakh opportunities would be generated. Then comes the Integrated Child Development Scheme, ICDS. Under the schemes, mothers and children below 6 years have got some financial aid. The role of education in poverty eradication includes to understand about the policy framework of the government, to make people literate, to provide them with suitable employment opportunities, to fight against exploitation, to earn a livelihood, to understand about various poverty reduction programs for overall development of individuals. Thus, these all are the importance and the role played by education in removing poverty. So, to conclude, removal of poverty should be given due importance because no country can develop if it breathes with a half lung only. Education is indispensable to economic development and poverty eradication. No economic development is possible without education. If the development process reduces the miseries of the people, it will do immense good to the economy and will promote feel-good syndrome in the society. A balanced education system promotes not only economic development but productivity and generate individual income per capita. Its influence is noticeable at the micro level of an individual family whose combination makes up the nation. So students, let's have a summary of the module. So far, we have discussed about the concept of poverty, poverty line, what is the relation between education and poverty, eradication and the steps taken by our government in poverty eradication. Hope you understood the concept. Well, join the mission for eradicating poverty. Thank you.